Thank you.
Yes, I'm going to talk about, radioactive waste is a very controversial issue. And I'm going to talk about that issue, and then, but I'm going to focus in on the safety issue of pools which are densely packed with spent fuel. And this is a problem in the United States, and it's also a problem in Taiwan. And it was a problem in Fukushima. We almost had an accident at Fukushima. And I have been, for 4 years after Fukushima, I was involved in a study under the US National Academy of Sciences on lessons learned from the Fukushima. And the second half of the study was focused on the spent fuel pools at Fukushima, and that's what I'm going to talk about. Now, the spent fuel is a very controversial subject. The question is, the fuel is mostly in pools. In Taiwan, it's entirely in the pools. But the question is, where should it go next? I'm going to argue that too much of it is in pools, and most of what is in the pools should be removed to dry storage, dry cask storage, and that will reduce the danger of the accident, the spent fuel pool accident that I'll discuss. There is a controversy about that in Taiwan. The concern is that the pressure from having full spent fuel pools increases the pressure to end to shut down the nuclear power plants. So there's already controversy about that, and there's similar controversy in Japan about having spent fuel in dry casks on reactor sites because there's a concern that it will never leave the sites. In the United States right now, we're discussing a central storage site for spent fuel. Whether there's politics about communities and a community hosting such a site. It's called in the United States the "not in my backyard" political phenomenon. Now in France and Japan, the fuel is shipped to a reprocessing plant, and that gives an off-site location. The host community for the reprocessing plant accepts the spent fuel because there are many jobs at the reprocessing plant, thousands of jobs. But the question is, where does the reprocessing waste go? And so and that's an issue in Japan right now. If you don't understand something I'm saying and you want to interrupt me, you should feel free at any time. So this is just to start with the basics. The fuel that's used in power reactors is typically 4 to 5% enriched uranium. That is the chain reacting U-235 in uranium is enriched from the natural level of about 0.7% to 4 or 5%. Now, in the reactor, that U-235 is mostly fissioned. That's where the energy comes from. And some of the U-238 in the fuel is turned into plutonium. And when the spent fuel is reprocessed, the plutonium is separated out, and since it's chain reacting, like U-235, it can be made into new fuel. It's a very expensive process. It costs about 10 times as much to make this plutonium, to separate this plutonium out and make it into new fuel, as it would cost to buy more low-enriched uranium. And it only reduces the amount of low-enriched uranium required by the fuel required by the nuclear power plant by about 10%. So my concern about reprocessing is not the cost, it's that plutonium is a nuclear weapons material. And in fact, we learned this in the 1960s and 1970s. The United States encouraged India to separate plutonium out from its spent fuel for recycle, and instead India used that plutonium to start its nuclear weapons program. And there was a controversy with Taiwan in the 1970s, I think it was, about the same issue. So eventually, the spent fuel or the reprocessing waste will have to be put into a deep underground repository. This is a picture of the situation of the design of an underground repository that Finland is building. Finland is the most advanced country in the world right now in building an underground repository for spent fuel. It's about the spent fuel would be in casks. The casks would be surrounded by clay, and after the casks are replaced, the tunnels would be filled with clay, and all these tunnels would be filled up, and it would be sealed there for a very long time. Now the not in my backyard phenomenon applies to underground repositories as well as to surface storage. But this particular power plant, well, actually, it's not in this picture. This particular repository is next to a nuclear power plant in Finland. And the community that hosts the nuclear power plant has decided that it would be safer to have the spent fuel deep underground than to keep it up on the surface indefinitely. So this is a political phenomenon that may dynamic that may play itself out in other locations. That makes sites of nuclear power plants also potential sites of radioactive waste repositories. Now, this is a results from a Swedish study. The repository in Finland is based on a design that was developed in Sweden. The regulatory process, the licensing process in Finland is faster than in Sweden, so the repository is actually moving forward, is ahead now in Finland. But basically in this, there's a scenario here where the casks and the clay around the casks fail after 100,000 years. And then some of the radioactivity, the long-lived radioactivity from the spent fuel, it gets dissolved in water and transported to the surface. And then these are the estimated doses to people at 1 million years after. And you see that the largest dose in this case comes from radon. radon is a decay product of uranium-238, which is in the spent fuel, which was originally underground. It was and was mined with the natural uranium, and it's in the enriched uranium, and now it goes underground again. And so you see the hazard in this scenario, in these calculations, is dominated from the uranium that came from underground and returned underground. And you see up here, this is a dose rate, an annual dose. You see up here, 10,000 times higher is actually the radon, that the average radon dose that we're exposed to from the uranium underground. You know, that a significant part of the natural radiation dose we receive is from radon from natural uranium underground. So this helps put the hazard into perspective, I think. The fact that it's a natural radioactivity that's actually dominates the spent fuel hazard in this scenario. Now, this is a U.S. spent fuel pool. I showed you before the assemblies, fuel assemblies. So these are about 4 meters high and maybe 20 centimeters on the side. And if we go here, you see that there's an assembly in every one of those squares, the boxes. I think my guess is that the spent fuel pools in Taiwan look very much like this. That they're completely dense packed. Is the way I describe it. As I'll explain, this is a dangerous situation, and we've been making the argument in the United States that this is a dangerous situation. So the arguments I'll make here are the same. Now, the pools were originally designed for about 5 years of spent fuel. And then the U.S. policy, when most of these reactors were designed, these reactors were designed in the 1960s and 1970s in the U.S. We have made built very few reactors since 1980 in the United States. And the expectation when they were designed was that the fuel would be, after a few years, would be transported to a reprocessing plant. But during around 1980, we decided not to reprocess our spent fuel, and so that there was no place for the fuel to go, and so the nuclear utilities decided to increase the density of the fuel in the storage pools. So now it's about 25 years of discharges typically before the pool is absolutely full with this dense racking. Now in Fukushima, we had a situation in unit number 4 where the fuel in a pool almost became uncovered, this is the reconstruction of the water level in that pool over a period of about a month, and these sudden increases are from when there was water injected from the concrete pump, but they couldn't see the pool, and so they thought that the pool was full after each of these injections, but in fact the level was going down. Now, when there was a balance calculated of the amount of water that was evaporating from the pool because of the heat of the spent fuel and the amount of water that was added, this was what the level should have been. And so from the basis of that calculation, the fuel should have been uncovered. They finally were able to measure directly the level of the pool at this date. So by that time, it should have been uncovered. But there was another source of water. Here's the pool. Next to it was a reactor well. It's at the level of the top of the reactor, the pool is. It's up high in the building. And the reactor was empty. The fuel had been pulled out of the reactor so that some repairs could be done inside the reactor. And the reactor cavity was filled with water. And there was a barrier in between this reactor well and the pool, and as the level of water in the pool went down, the water began to leak into the pool. So this is what saved Japan. This leakage of water from the reactor pit into the pool. Now, there was a hydrogen explosion, even in this building, because some hydrogen leaked from the unit number 3, from the core. Hydrogen was created by this, I'll show later, but it was created by an interaction of steam and zirconium. The zirconium cladding of the fuel in the unit number 3 in the reactor, and it leaked into building number 4, and it exploded and destroyed the top of the building. The spent fuel pool is at this level, so the building above the pool was destroyed, and so if there had been a fire, if there had been a loss of water in pool number 4, and the fuel had heated up and caught on fire, the radioactivity that would have come out would have been able to go directly into the atmosphere. Now there was about as much radioactivity, long life, the radioactivity that has been the most, that has resulted in having to evacuate about 1,000 kilometers of land, 1,000 square kilometers of land in Fukushima, is a fission product called cesium-137, which has a half-life of 30 years, so it's a very long contamination. There was about as much cesium-137 in the pool, 900 picobecquerel, as in the 3 reactors cores that melted down. But the cesium, only about 2%, 1 to 3% of the cesium in the cores, in the melted down cores, escaped into the atmosphere, because there were containment structures around the reactors. But you can see here, no containment if there had been a fire. And so the result, if there had been a fire, about 50 times as much cesium-137 would have been released from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant as actually was released as a result of the reactor core meltdowns. And it would have been a 50 times worse accident. Now there was one of the U.S. Nuclear laboratories did a hypothetical scenario for the pool number 4, and if there had been no water added, either from the cement pumper or from the leakage from the adjacent pool, then the heat of the spent fuel would have evaporated the water, and the water level would have after about 30 days. This is the top of the fuel. Spent fuel would have been at about 30 days most of the fuel would have been exposed, and it would have caught fire. And this is the percentage of the cesium that would be released to the atmosphere, about 90% in their calculations. So this is the, on the left is the actual contamination from the Fukushima Daiichi, from the 3 core meltdowns. And on the middle, on the right, is the contamination levels that we calculated for 2 days, for 2 historical weather situations. If the release had begun on April 9th. The actual accident happened on March 11th. So if the release started on April 9th, then you would have had this situation with most of the cesium would have been blown over the ocean, but some of the cesium would have landed on the land. And then this situation, if it had started a few days after the Fukushima accident, if, for example, there had been a leak in the pool and it had emptied more quickly than by evaporation, then you would have had this situation. And you see how much worse this accident would have been than the accident that actually happened. And measuring it in terms of people who would have to relocate, about 100,000 in the case of the actual accident, about 1.5 million if the wind was carried most of the cesium-137 offshore, and about 35 million if the wind blew toward Tokyo. A colleague from Korea asked that we do some calculations for an accident at the Kori nuclear power plant in Korea, and you see that when you have small countries, this can become an international accident. So you see here Japan and China being involved. Usually, not so much South Korea because the wind. But here you have a situation where it blows to North Korea. So this is a regional issue, and I suppose a reactor accident in China could affect Taiwan. So I guess usually the wind is blowing away from China, so less likely that an accident in Taiwan would affect China. Now this was the situation, the fuel in the pool at Fukushima unit number 4 at the time of the accident. And the red fuel is the core, is the fuel which was removed from the reactor core. And it was therefore the hottest. Each fuel assembly was generating about, at the time of the accident, was generating about between 3 and 4 kilowatts per fuel assembly. Now, so this is you see these racks. The pool is not completely filled up like it is in the United States or Taiwan, but you see these racks are dense packed, and so the racks are like this, and because the fuel is so close together, it's basically as close together as it is in a reactor core. So in order to prevent it from starting to have a chain reaction between the fuel assemblies, you have to put a wall between between you have to put each fuel assembly in a box with neutron absorbing walls. So but the problem is that that there's no way for the air to get in. If there's a loss of water, there's no possibility of air cooling until the water level actually the water is completely gone when some air could come in from the bottom, and there are holes in the bottom of the rack. The old racks were open, and so you could have air cooling at any stage of the accident. That's why it's safer. Now, in the U.S., when the pools are full, and most of the pools now are full, just like in Taiwan, in order to continue operating the reactor, it's necessary to remove the oldest fuel to make space for newly discharged fuel. And this is a picture shows where the fuel is removed to. These are air-cooled casks. They contain about 10 or 15 tons of fuel. For 10 tons of fuel, it would be every year about 2 of these casks would be filled. So there are 13 rows, I think, of casks. So the 13 years of discharges here. And you see it's quite compact. It's also quite safe because there's no water to be lost. It's just the air removes the heat. The heat flows to the surface, the outer surface of the cask, and the air carries the heat away. The air rises as it gets warmed and more cooler air comes to replace it. Now, this U.S. situation is we're out here now. Basically, all the pools are full. So you see that the amount of spent fuel in pools will not increase, but the amount of spent fuel in dry cask storage will increase with time. And then when the reactors start shutting down, it's assumed here that the reactors will shut down after 60 years. Then the remaining fuel in the pools will be moved to dry casks. And you see that there are just a few reactors that will continue to operate. Assuming the U.S. does not start building new reactors, which at the moment there's no indication that they're too costly. Renewable solar power and wind power and natural gas are all very much less costly than nuclear power in the United States, especially nuclear power from a new nuclear power plant where you need to pay for the construction of the reactor. Most of the reactors in the United States, the construction of the reactors costs have been paid for already. Now, so 14 years ago, a group of us made a proposal, the argument that I just made, that it would be safer to remove the spent fuel from the pools after 5 years. Our Congress asked the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to look at, first, asked the National Academy of Sciences to review this. National Academy of Sciences said that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission should think about this. It didn't until after Fukushima. After Fukushima, then they decided to think about this. But as you will see, they thought about it in a way which made them conclude that this was not a good idea. They decided to do a cost-benefit analysis. That is, how much would it cost the utilities versus how much would the reduced accident consequences save the public. Now, what they found was was that in fact the consequences would be dramatically reduced by going to low density storage. And the reason was that it would be reduced by about 99%. The release of cesium-137 would be reduced by about 99%. Part of that was due to the fact that there would be less cesium-137 in the pool, maybe 4 times less. But the other part was that they found that with the low density pool, less hydrogen would be produced by steam reactions with the zirconium in the fuel. And in fact, not enough hydrogen would be produced to blow up the building. And that therefore, the building would act as to contain most of the cesium. Whereas with the dense packed pool, they predicted a hydrogen explosion, and therefore that all the cesium would be released to the atmosphere. So they did a cost-benefit analysis. They started with the cost of going from a dense packed fuel to a low density pool would be about $50 million. I frankly don't understand this number yet, but I've assumed that it's correct for the purposes of this discussion. They estimated that the average consequences would be $700 billion from a spent fuel pool fire. When we corrected some errors, we got actually up to $2.2 trillion. So then they said, well, what's the probability of a spent fuel pool fire in the next 20 years, the remaining life of these reactors? And they calculated the probability was about 1 chance in 10,000 per reactor. We have 100 reactors, so it would be about 1% for the. And so they divided if you divide the 2 trillion by 10,000, you get about 220 million per. And so you could think that, and these numbers, of course, are very uncertain because the probability is very uncertain, and the consequences also are uncertain because they depend on which way the wind blows, toward a city or not, for example. But they didn't calculate the 2 point. So on this basis, you would have said, okay, well, the benefits are 4 times bigger than the costs, so we should do it. But then they changed the way they calculated the benefits. And they said, well, first of all, we will not include any damages beyond 80 kilometers from the reactor. And then they assumed decontamination. Everybody could go home after a year. This is not what happened in Fukushima. And recently, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission admitted that they had no basis for that assumption. And then they assumed that people could stay in their homes for a 3 times higher dose than was used, threshold for relocation that was used at Fukushima, Chernobyl, and is recommended by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. So, so that they in this way they reduced the number down to 7 million. 7 million, and say, see, it's 7 million, it costs 50 million, the benefit is only 7 million, so therefore we shouldn't do it. Now, the reason they did this was political. Right now, in the United States, the nuclear utilities some of the nuclear utilities are in trouble. because it costs, even with the nuclear power plant completely paid for, the cost of operating them is still more than the cost of wind power or natural gas power. And so some of the nuclear power plants in the United States are being shut down. So basically the concern in the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was we don't want to kill the industry that we regulate. And the concern, and there was pressure on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission from Congress, which was being influenced by the industries, not to make regulations that would cost a significant amount of money. Here's just some example. Maybe I'll just go ahead. This is what we call regulatory capture. That is the phenomenon that I just described. And even one of the congressmen explained how he was able to force the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to become less aggressive regulator by threatening its budget, to cut its budget by a third. So here is the for one example of a nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania on the U.S. East Coast. You see the red areas would be evacuated, would have to be evacuated. You see very strange patterns here. And this, you see a low contamination area and then a high contamination area. And that's due to rain. The rain, in fact, the area to the northeast of the Fukushima Daiichi plant was contaminated by rain. And so rain is important in this contamination. So the little circle here is the circle beyond which the Nuclear Regulatory Commission just refused to include the consequences. So only consequences within that little circle were included in their cost-benefit analysis. And these were for different days, weathers on different days, starting the 1st of January, 1st of April, 1st of July, 1st of October. Historical weather again. So we found that about, on average, the area that would have to be evacuated in the united States as a result of the release that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission calculated as average for such an accident, that it would be about 40,000 square kilometers, which is about, I understand, about the area of Taiwan. And in the United States, on average, for the locations of U.S. nuclear power plants, that's about 8 million people. And once again, it was about a tenth of a million people that were actually relocated in the case of Fukushima. So my recommendations are that the regulators should focus on preventing these large consequence events. The NRC estimates that the chances of this kind of fire happening in the United States in the next 20 years are between 0.1% and 6%, not including terrorism. They did not include the possibility of terrorism in their estimates of the probability. I asked them why not, and they said, we don't know how to calculate it. So we assumed the probability of terrorism would be 0. In the United States, where we have about 100 nuclear power reactors, the cost would be about $4 million, according to the industry estimate. As I say, I think this is a high estimate, but I still haven't understood how they calculated it. Taiwan has a smaller number of pools, so it would be maybe $200 million in Taiwan to remove the spent fuel older than 5 years, that has cooled more than 5 years from the pools in Taiwan. And this would be much less. How many pools are there? There are 8 reactors, 6 reactors?
6 reactors.
And each of them has a pool?
Yes.
Okay, so you know, about 150 million or 200 million. No, about maybe 300 million if you use the U.S. number. It would be cheaper than reprocessing, and you would not get, and reprocessing does not solve anything. And it does create separated plutonium, which is a nuclear weapons material. And of course, we just have an article coming out today in the United States where we make these arguments in the Science magazine, which is a big journal in the United States. It's just out today where we make these arguments. And if you have some journalists, I can give you the link to that. And so, yeah, that's the end of my story.